Hey, welcome back, everybody. So, we left off talking about the history of federalism. So, we talked about cooperative federalism, dual federalism, and devolution. Very big terms you're going to need to know. But today, we're going to talk about fiscal federalism, right? So, when you ever hear of fiscal, you got to think of something that has to do with the action of money, right? So, as you can see, fiscal federalism is the pattern of spending, taxing, and providing grants in the federal system. So if we look at fiscal federalism, this is the cornerstone of the national government's relation with the state and the local government. So, everything that you're going to see from here on out in the course is going, like, related to the government, is always going to be tied back to money. Money, money, money. So, but when it comes to relationship to the different levels of government, money plays a huge part. So as you can see in the graphic here, the donkey chasing the carrot. So pretty much the federal government makes the state and local governments chase the carrot for money. So, we talk about education, with the No Child Left Behind. And then, so the federal government says, hey, here's the regulation states that you want to qualify if you want funding. So it's like states got to jump through these hoops, and then therefore they make the school districts jump through the hoops, all for funding for education. So we're going to delve into this a little deeper. All right. So how does the federal government give money? There's some ways the states like it, some ways the states don't like it, but we're going to delve into that a little deeper. So grants and aid. This is money given to state governments by the national government, right? So they're not just going to say, hey, here's a block of cash, here you go. They're usually going to give it in the form of a grant, right? So here is the money, and they'll give it in a different form of grants, which we'll talk about later. But so grants and aid, this is how they give the money. They give it in the form of grants. So like we talked about, the drinking age is 21. That's actually a state issue. So, but the federal government says if you want to lower your drinking age to 18, we're going to take away your federal highway funding money. So that's why all states keep the drinking age at 21. They want that grant that's a given set price, and it's easier for states to balance their budgets. So, getting that money, keeping the drinking age at 21, states will abide by that. But when talking about grants, this is a response to the growing amount of issues in state and local governments. The number of problems for the national government, sometimes the states can take care of it better than the national government. So we talked about devolution. So there's a lot that can happen here. So, we need more and more money, though, as more and more problems come about. As the government's going to create more and more regulations, we need all this stuff. We need more money to make sure these regulations are going to follow through. So, and we'll talk more about that when we get to chapter 15 and we talk about the bureaucracy in the executive branch. But as we look, there's about $400 billion in grants every year. That's a lot of money. And that statistic is probably a little old. It's probably way higher than that now. As you look at our chart here, let me move myself. It ends in 2009. I mean, that was more than 10 years ago. So that number is definitely higher than $400 billion in grants every year. Ooh, wrong way. All right, so if we look right here, the post-1960s explosion of the federal grants to state and local governments. So you can kind of see on our chart here, over here on the side, the billions of national dollars that are spent, and as the years go on, and this only goes up to 2011, so you can see we spend a lot on health, we spend a lot on income security, education, transportation, natural resources and environment is the yellow, really tiny, energy. So you can see the statistics. The government is spending more and more money every year to the state and local governments. And they do it for a variety of things. It could be pet projects. It could be fixing infrastructure. Like it could be like, hey, I want a teapot museum. Yes, that does exist in North Carolina. I want a sculpture park in Seattle. So all those get paid for through grants. All righty. So now we're going to talk about like the form of grants in which money comes. The first one can come in mandates. These are direct this is where the federal government directs the state and local governments to comply with federal rules by threatening penalties or funding. Like, hey, we're going to give a mandate that you got to do this, and if you don't, you're going to lose funding, or you're going to get fined, or you're going to have to pay penalties. And again, we talked about the American with Disabilities Act. They're going to say, hey, are you complying with this? Are your sinks a certain height? Do you have stalls big enough to hold a wheelchair with grab bars? Are your blow dryers too high? Can they be low for somebody sitting in a wheelchair? Can they reach those? That's why sometimes in bathrooms you'll see sinks and then like a lower sink. That is because they have to meet ADA requirements. And so there are many mandates that the federal government puts on state and local governments, and a lot of those come unfunded, actually. And that's what we call unfunded mandates. These are requirements on state and local governments, but no money. So, for instance, following the ADA example, the federal government might say, hey, you got to have handicap parking spots, but we're not going to give you any money to do that. You're going to have to make it happen. You're going to have to create wheelchair ramps. You're going to have automatic doors, and so a lot of those mandates are going to come unfunded, like, again, doing a parking spot. Okay, cool. Block off 2 spots, make it 1, put lines through it. What does that take? Blue spray paint, hang up a sign? It's not going to cost you that much money, but if you don't have it, you're going to pay some fines. So, mandates generally is a way that the federal government gets state and local governments to comply. And again, the drinking age, that's a mandate. They mandated you keep it at 21, but states can lower it. But then all of a sudden that state, so let's say Ohio drops the drinking age to 18. If we lose that federal highway funding money, all we're going to do is spike the price of alcohol. So that's going to go way up. Well, are people going to buy alcohol if it's way more expensive? No, not if you live here where we live. You're going to drive down to northern Kentucky or right out to Indiana. You're only a couple miles away and get it where it's cheaper. So it's not worth it for states to do it, but they follow that mandate of keeping the drinking age at 21. All right, so categorical grants. All right, these are grants for a specific purpose. Usually requires matching funds for state and local governments. States do not like categorical grants because they got to match funds. So let's say, hey, we need a new bridge. And so what the government's going to say is, here's some money. That money must be spent on the bridge. If you spend it anywhere else, we're going to penalize you, or you're going to lose funding somewhere else. So categorical grants, they must be used for that specific purpose. So they say, hey, here's a grant to build a bridge, or here's a grant for fixing up this community. Let's say it's like over the Rhine. That money must be spent to fix up over the Rhine. Cannot be used to, repair restaurants at the banks or, other parts of town, Brookwood or anything like that. No, it must be used specifically in OTR. All right. So in the part that the states don't like, it usually requires matching funds. So let's say that, hey, we need to build this bridge. It's going to cost $8 million. The federal government's going to say, okay, we'll give you 4, but you got to pay 4. It's like, okay. States don't like that because then they might either have to tax, they probably don't budget for that, or they might have to go into a little bit of debt for a couple of years just to repair that bridge. And so they don't like categorical grants because they don't like the fact that they have to match the funds. So that's an issue that they might have. Block grants. All right, so these are a little different. These are basically think about taking a huge block of money and giving it to it, like welfare. We talked about the Welfare Reform Act of 1996, right? And devolution. The federal government said, hey, states, this one-size-fit-all that we have at the national level doesn't fit what you need to help your citizens that need welfare. So when they turn it back over to the states, they basically said, here's your block of money. You decide how much each individual is going to get, who qualifies. So you got to come up with the qualifications. And that's why we talked about before. Some states say, hey, you got to take a drug test, or hey, you got to do community service before you get it. But that's how does the state issue that? Well, the federal government gives them in a ginormous block, and they can spend it on different aspects of welfare. They can provide WIC, that women, infant, and children, right? So, that's young babies, pregnant moms, all that, so they can see who qualifies for that or whatnot. Or do they, so they can decide, we're going to put more money in WIC, less money in, people at low incomes. So they can decide how they want to do it. There's less restrictions when it comes to these block grants. So you can see our example, community development block grant. So I talked about OTR before. Back in 2008, Over the Rhine was voted the worst neighborhood in the entire country to live in because you had a 1 in 8 chance. So 1 out of every 8 people in Over the Rhine were committing felonious crimes, like big felonies, murder, all that stuff. And so what Cincinnati did is they petitioned the state and also the federal government said, hey, we need some community block grants. Like, we want a block grant to clean up not only Over the Rhine, but we want to put more money into the banks. When they were right after they built the Red Stadium, they wanted to build that up, put a better parking garage, put up apartments. Now they want to build a stage down there, right? So it's like, okay, we got a couple neighborhoods that need to be cleaned up. Here's a grant, clean up. It's not going to tell you like where you can spend the money. We could spend 60% of it in Over the Rhine, 40% of the banks, or we can go 80% here, 20% there. So we can decide how we want to use it, but we just need to make sure we're using that money on community development. So, however we want to do it, if it means we need more entertainment, more restaurants, more places for people to hang out, a park, things like that. Block grants have very few restrictions, and states do not have to match those funds. So block grants are good. You just got to think, I'm getting a huge block of money given to me. All right. So states love block grants. Revenue sharing. This is something that happened from 1972 to 1986. So this is where, the federal government, state governments, they shared tax revenue with, all levels of government to be spent on almost any governmental purpose, right? So, but then it started to get too confusing. So they kind of went away from revenue sharing. Don't worry about creating a grant proposal. Usually that's a group activity, but with everything going on right now, we won't do that. So something to think about. Why does the national government prefer a categorical grant? Right? And why do states prefer block grants? Right? So that's the exit question I want you to think of. All right. So we're not going to really research a grant as of yet. So, all right. If you have any questions over fiscal federalism, please let me know. Make sure you know the different types of grants, mandates, grants and aids. You'll definitely be seeing that question in your guided reading. So make sure you're reading thoroughly in the textbook and going over that. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. See you guys.